My fiancé said, I cheated because you were too busy working. I replied, that work paid for this wedding. Then I transferred the funds to a new account and sent the receipt to the caterer. When she showed up hungry to a canceled reception, I used to think long hours were a temporary price for a better life. You know, grind now, rest later. But apparently, later had an expiration date that my fiancé decided to set without warning. My name's Ben Harper, 35, a construction project manager in Portland. I've worked my way up from sweeping sawdust on job sites to overseeing multi-million-dollar builds. The kind of guy who doesn't take vacations, but makes sure everyone else gets paid on time. My fiancée, Lydia Park, worked in marketing for a startup that thought beanbags and kombucha on tap counted as culture. We'd been engaged for 9 months. Our wedding was supposed to be at this lakeside lodge outside the city, glass walls, pine beams, fairy lights along the water. Lydia picked it out, of course. She wanted something elegant but cozy, which is code for expensive as hell. I said yes because that's what you do when you love someone. You find a way to make it work. For months, I took every extra shift I could. I stayed up doing overtime paperwork at my desk, sometimes coming home at midnight. Lydia didn't like that. At first, she said she missed me. Then she started saying I wasn't there for her. That word, there, started coming up in every argument. You're not here emotionally, she'd say. And I'd think, I'm trying to build something for us. I didn't see it coming when it finally snapped. It was a Thursday night, 2 weeks before the wedding. I came home late, later than usual, because the client wanted a last-minute inspection before signing off on the building permit. I walked into the apartment with takeout in hand, her favorite Thai place. Lydia was sitting on the couch, lights low, no TV, no music, just silence. She didn't even look at me when I set the food down. Her voice was flat, rehearsed. We need to talk. The words made my chest tighten. Not because I didn't expect them, we'd been off for weeks, but because I already knew the pattern. Every time someone says that, it's never about talking. It's about ending. She started rambling about how we'd grown apart, how I'd been so focused on work that she felt invisible. Then she said something that made the air in the room feel heavy. I slept with someone. Just like that. No warning, no build-up. I remember staring at the floor because my mind couldn't process the words. Her explanation poured out fast. Some co-worker from her office. One of those happy hour accidents. It wasn't serious, she said. It just happened. Apparently, it had been going on for weeks, and she told me she wanted to come clean before the wedding because she couldn't live with guilt. I just stood there. I think she expected yelling, maybe tears, maybe a dramatic reaction. Instead, I asked one question. Why? She said, because you were too busy working. That line hit harder than the confession itself. The same work she resented was what paid for her ring, her designer dress, her dream venue, the catering, the DJ, the open bar. Every single thing she'd bragged about to her friends. I told her to leave. Not screaming, not angry, just told her to get out and that I'd pack her stuff later. She walked out without even closing the door behind her. I stood in that doorway for a long time, staring at the quiet hallway, realizing that love doesn't end like in movies, it just dissolves. When I finally sat down, I opened the wedding spreadsheet we'd shared on Google Drive. Every line item had my name next to it. $43,000 in total expenses, every payment scheduled to clear before the ceremony. All that work, all that time, for something that had just turned into a bad investment. That's when something in me flipped. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to post online or throw her things out the window. No, I was going to handle it the same way I handled every project, methodically, cleanly, and on schedule. The first thing I did was transfer the joint savings balance into my personal account. I'd been the primary depositor, so legally, it was mine. Then I checked the vendor list. Venue deposit, paid in full. Catering, final payment pending. Photographer, due in 3 days. Flowers, DJ, coordinator, all pending charges. I stayed up until 3 a.m. that night making calls and sending polite emails. There's been a change in billing. Please redirect all future transactions to my business account for reconciliation. Nobody questioned it. I even added my company's letterhead to the messages. It looked official enough. The next morning, Lydia texted me like nothing happened. We should talk about how to handle the wedding, she wrote. It's complicated, but we can figure something out. I didn't answer. Over the next few days, she kept messaging, not apologies, just logistics. Guest lists, catering preferences, honeymoon bookings. She said she wanted to postpone until we'd had time to heal. But then she posted a selfie with her bridesmaids captioned, "Final fitting day? Can't wait for forever." It was surreal. She had no idea I was undoing everything beneath the surface. By Saturday, I'd already spoken with the bank. The account that handled all vendor payments was closed. Every refund request was set to go to my new account under Project Reallocation. Mark, my best friend since high school, helped me double-check everything. He worked in finance and told me it was the cleanest break he'd ever seen. He didn't even ask for details at first, just helped. But when I finally told him what Lydia had done, he shook his head and said, "She doesn't get to walk down that aisle like nothing happened." I agreed. The next week, I stopped wearing my ring. Lydia noticed during a brief meetup when she came by to pick up a box of things. She didn't mention the cheating. She didn't mention the confession. Instead, she asked if I'd finalized the catering balance. I told her I'd handled it. That was true, just not how she thought. She smiled, relieved, and said, "Good, because I want everything to be perfect." I watched her walk away with that fake sense of control and realized she was still living in her version of the story, the one where I'd always clean up her mess. But not this time. That night, I logged in to check the account balance one more time. Everything was done. Refunds scheduled. Transfers cleared. Vendors notified. I stared at the confirmation page for a long while. The cursor blinked next to the transaction label. I typed, "Wedding liquidation." It felt cold, but also final. The next day, Lydia texted again, pretending we were still moving forward. She asked if I'd remembered to pick up her dad's cufflinks from the jeweler. I didn't respond. Then she asked if I'd be at the rehearsal dinner. I replied, yes, because I would be there, just not for what she thought. The night before the wedding, I drove to the venue. The lights inside the lodge were warm and flickering, the lake reflecting the setup crew moving tables. It was supposed to be the most important night of our lives. Instead, I sat in the parking lot, watching through the windshield, thinking about how strange it was that the line between love and revenge can be as thin as a wedding ribbon. When I finally started the car, I took one last look at the glowing windows, the fairy lights she'd spent weeks picking out. Then I drove off, leaving it all behind, knowing the next time she stood there, surrounded by guests and cameras, she'd realize everything she built on my back was gone. The morning after that parking lot visit, I woke up with a strange kind of calm. Not peace exactly, more like the stillness before demolition. I wasn't angry anymore, just focused. Every choice had a purpose now, every call a calculated move. Lydia still thought the wedding was happening. She posted an Instagram story that morning showing a box of custom napkins with our initials. "Can't believe it's almost here," she wrote. Dozens of hearts and comments flooded in. It was surreal seeing her play pretend so confidently, as if she hadn't detonated our engagement 2 weeks before the ceremony. I spent the day making what I called closure calls. First, the venue. The manager, a calm woman named Gwen, remembered me immediately. I told her we had an unexpected issue and that the event might be postponed. She said the refund deadline had technically passed, but because I'd been so polite and organized through the process, she'd make an exception if I signed a cancellation agreement that day. I signed it electronically and watched 40% of the deposit return to my personal account by evening. The caterer was next, a family-owned business called Mountain Creek Events. I told them the bride's side was restructuring finances. That phrase always works on small businesses. They assume there's a lawyer somewhere involved and just comply. They agreed to reissue the catering refund within 72 hours. I forwarded them my new bank details, thanked them for their professionalism, and deleted the thread before Lydia could ever see it. By noon, half the wedding budget was back in my control. When I met Mark Hanley for coffee that afternoon, he looked at the balance sheet and gave a low whistle. "You've recovered nearly everything. You should work in fraud recovery." I told him it wasn't about money. It was about reclaiming the hours I spent earning it. Every late night, every double shift, every missed dinner that she weaponized against me. Now those sacrifices had a second purpose, cleaning up her mess. Mark nodded, then hesitated. "What's the endgame, though? Are you going to cancel everything outright?" I said yes, but not immediately. I wanted her to feel the gravity of what she'd done in real time, not as an announcement, but as a slow collapse. Over the next few days, I moved like a ghost through the logistics of a wedding that no longer existed. The florist was surprisingly sympathetic. She refunded the full amount after hearing the word family emergency. The DJ service transferred their deposit after I offered to handle potential legal paperwork. The photographer, a guy named Brendan, was harder to convince. He'd already blocked out the date. So I paid him a partial cancellation fee and asked him to send confirmation that the event was off. When Lydia found out about the photographer canceling, she texted me in a panic. "Why did he say we canceled?" I replied, "I'll handle it." She thanked me, completely unaware I already had. In her head, I was still the reliable one, the guy who cleaned up behind her mistakes and made sure everything looked perfect. She had no idea that same reliability was now her undoing. On Thursday, 3 days before the ceremony, I went to the bank in person. I told the teller I wanted to move a large balance into a secondary business account I used for contract work. It wasn't technically a business transaction, but it sounded legitimate enough. I moved $42,000 in total, every dollar that had been meant for the wedding. The banker asked if I was planning to close the old joint account. I said not yet. I wanted her to see the number 0 on the day she needed it most. That night, Lydia called. Her voice was unusually soft, almost nostalgic. She said she'd been thinking a lot about us. She wanted to talk after the wedding. If we can get through this gracefully. I asked what gracefully meant. She said it meant no drama. She still thought there was a future to salvage, even after what she did. That's when I realized she didn't confess out of guilt. She confessed to relieve herself of it. She wanted me to carry the weight so she could walk lighter. Friday came, the last full day before the wedding. I was supposed to meet the event coordinator to finalize details. I showed up early, wearing the same gray work jacket I'd worn since college. She greeted me with champagne flutes and a clipboard, assuming I was there for a final walkthrough. I told her there'd been irreconcilable issues and handed her a cancellation form I'd already printed. She didn't ask for details. She just nodded and offered sympathy in that polite, detached tone people use when they sense heartbreak but don't want to touch it. As I left the lodge, I saw Lydia's car pull up. She was laughing with one of her bridesmaids, phone out, filming the building for a story. She didn't see me. I watched her through the windshield for a long moment. She looked happy, almost glowing. She had no idea the lights behind her would be off tomorrow. Later that night, I met Mark again. We sat in his apartment going over one final spreadsheet, making sure every vendor confirmation matched my private account. When we finished, he looked at me and said, "You could walk away clean right now. You've already won." But it wasn't about winning. It was about the quiet satisfaction of letting truth unfold naturally. Around midnight, Lydia texted me a photo of her wedding dress hanging near the window with the caption, "Tomorrow." I didn't reply. At 2 a.m., I forwarded the final transfer receipt from the catering company to myself, just so I'd have proof of completion. The subject line read, "Final refund per groom's request." I knew that line would echo. When the sun came up, I drove back to the lake. The lodge was dark, the staff gone, the chairs stacked. I parked by the water and watched the mist move across the surface. It was quiet except for the distant hum of a generator and the occasional bird. I thought about the first time Lydia and I had visited the place. She'd walked barefoot on the dock, saying she could picture herself walking down the aisle there. I remembered thinking how peaceful it looked. Now it felt like a set from a movie that wrapped filming and forgot to strike the props. Before leaving, I took a photo from the car window, just the empty dock, the calm lake, and the faint reflection of the sky. I sent it to Mark with a single message, "Ready?" He replied, "Tomorrow's going to be something." He was right, because tomorrow wasn't just her wedding day anymore. It was the day she'd learned that every hour I'd spent working late, every dollar she mocked me for earning, every sacrifice she turned into a reason to betray me. It all built the foundation for her public unraveling. And I wouldn't even need to raise my voice. The morning of the wedding felt like a movie set with no script. I woke up before sunrise, brewed coffee, and sat in silence as the city outside started moving. Somewhere across town, Lydia was probably getting her hair done, smiling in front of a mirror, surrounded by friends who thought this was the happiest day of her life. The irony was cruelly perfect. Everything she was about to step into had already been dismantled piece by piece. I'd spent 2 weeks undoing what I spent a year building, and not one person had noticed. At 8:30, my phone buzzed. It was Mark. He texted, "You sure you want to see this through?" I replied, "It's already done." He sent back a simple thumbs up, and then a second message, "Check the venue tag on Instagram later." I showered, dressed in jeans and a flannel, and drove to a diner on the edge of town. It was one of those old places that still used jukeboxes and smelled like burnt toast. I ordered breakfast and sat at a booth by the window, watching families and wedding guests drive past with dresses and suits hanging in back seats. By 10:30, my phone started lighting up with notifications. Friends from work who'd been invited were texting me, "What's going on at the lodge?" And "Dude, are you okay?" I opened social media. Under the location tag for the venue, someone had posted a video of the front gates, locked. Dozens of guests were standing outside, confused, dressed in formal wear, checking their phones. A woman's voice in the video said, "They canceled?" But the bride said everything was confirmed. I scrolled further. A few photos showed Lydia's bridesmaids pacing near the parking lot, trying to call vendors. The caption from one of the guests read, "This is insane. No one's here. The staff said it's all canceled. The bride is freaking out." I took a slow sip of coffee. The diner's old radio hummed in the background, the sound so ordinary it made the chaos feel distant. At 11:15, the first direct call came in, from Lydia. I ignored it. Then another. Then another. When the fourth call hit, I finally answered. Her voice was shaky but trying to sound composed. "Ben, where are you? They're saying the venue's closed." The caterer isn't answering. Did you confirm everything? I didn't answer right away. I wanted her to sit in that silence. Then I said, everything was paid for. It doesn't look like it, she snapped. They're saying the payments were reversed. I ended the call mid-sentence. 5 minutes later, she texted, you need to fix this now. Everyone's here. My parents are humiliated. I can't reach anyone. I sent her a photo in response, the transfer receipt from the caterer's account, the same one I'd sent to myself at 2 a.m. 2 nights before. The subject line was still visible, final refund per groom's request. No caption, no explanation, just the proof. She called again almost immediately, but I let it ring. The thought of her standing there, surrounded by guests, staring at her phone, realizing what that receipt meant. It was colder than anything I'd ever done, but it was honest. Mark arrived at the diner around noon. He sat down opposite me, checked his phone, and said, it's all over the internet now. I looked at him. Already. He nodded. One of her cousins posted a video of her crying in front of the venue sign. Said she was betrayed by the groom. People are speculating like crazy. Some think you got cold feet, others say it was a setup. No one knows the truth yet. I didn't smile. There was nothing to enjoy in it. It just felt inevitable. He showed me the clip. Lydia was in her gown, makeup streaked, screaming at the event coordinator. The poor woman kept explaining that the contracts were canceled per the groom's instruction. Someone in the background yelled, the food truck's gone too. Her father tried to pull her aside, but she pushed him off. Cameras caught everything. A photographer who'd shown up late took a wide shot of her standing alone near the lake, surrounded by empty chairs and confused guests. The comments online were merciless. Some people called it karma. Others wrote, imagine cheating and still thinking you deserve a wedding. She must have realized how fast things were spreading, because within minutes, her accounts went private. But the damage was done. By 2 o'clock, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I picked up out of habit. It was Gwen, the venue manager. She sounded awkward. Mr. Harper, I just wanted to confirm. You did intend for today's cancellation to stand, correct? We have the signed form, but there's quite a scene happening outside. I said yes. Everything's in writing. You did the right thing. She hesitated. Understood. Well, I hope everything works out for you both. It already did, I said, and hung up. Mark and I finished lunch in silence. He paid the bill before I could reach for my wallet, then said, you're probably going to hear from her family next. He was right again. That evening, around 5, I got a long message from Lydia's mother. It started polite, asking what happened, saying they were worried, but by the end, it turned into blame. She said Lydia was destroyed, that I'd embarrassed her in front of hundreds of people. She even accused me of being vindictive. I didn't reply. Instead, I checked my email. Every vendor refund had cleared. Even the florist had sent a confirmation with a note. We're sorry to hear about the cancellation. Best of luck to you. I transferred the full amount into my new account, labeled it Harper Construction Reserve, and closed the joint account permanently. By the time the sun went down, the entire ordeal had burned itself out. Guests left. The photos stopped posting. Lydia's family took her home. The lodge stood empty, just like I'd seen it the night before, quiet, still, indifferent. Mark texted later that night. So what now? I didn't answer right away. I stared at the blinking cursor, thinking of all the months that led up to this. The early mornings, the packed lunches, the endless, one more overtime shift. All of it for a woman who said she felt neglected while she was sneaking around with someone from her office happy hour. Finally, I typed back. Now I go back to work. It wasn't a metaphor. Monday morning, I'd be back at the construction site, running safety checks, reviewing blueprints, and watching something new take shape. Because in a strange way, that's all this ever was, a teardown before rebuilding. Before I went to bed, I opened social media one last time. Someone had posted the photo of Lydia crying by the lake, but this time, it was side by side with a screenshot of her old tweet from a month earlier. A real man provides no matter what. The comments beneath it were brutal. People connected the dots faster than I expected. Someone even tagged her workplace. I shut off the phone, lay back on the couch, and for the first time in months, felt genuinely tired. Not defeated, just done working on something that was never real to begin with. When you build your life with someone, you think loyalty is part of the foundation. But sometimes, it's just paint over rotting wood. And that morning at the diner, watching the chaos unravel from a safe distance, I realized something simple and true. She cheated because I was too busy working. But that work had done something she never could. It built the exit. By Sunday morning, the storm had already started to settle. Lydia's social media had gone completely dark, but the screenshots lived on everywhere else. Portland's gossip circles loved a scandal, especially one that looked cinematic. An abandoned bride by the lake, mascara running, empty tables reflected in the water. I didn't post a thing. I didn't defend myself, didn't confirm the story, didn't add a single word online. I didn't have to. The truth had already written itself. The following week felt surreal. I went back to the job site, hard hat on, boots sinking into wet gravel, surrounded by the familiar noise of drills and machinery. It was grounding. After all that chaos, the rhythm of construction felt honest. When you lay concrete, it either sets or it doesn't. People, on the other hand, pretend until they collapse. That Monday, Mark Hanley stopped by during lunch break. He leaned against my truck, handed me a coffee, and said, "She's trending again." I gave him a look. He shrugged. Her company placed her on leave. Someone leaked the texts between her and that coworker. Turns out, his fiancée posted them on her own account, tagging Lydia by name. So that was it. The entire facade crumbled in less than 72 hours. Lydia had spent years curating an image of being sophisticated and grounded, but one screenshot of her messages, asterisk, "He doesn't make time for me, but his money will," asterisk, was enough to sink her completely. She was fired by Wednesday. Her firm called it unprofessional conduct. Her affair partner, from what I heard, was transferred to another branch in California. The fiancé he'd betrayed dumped him publicly, ending her post with, "They deserve each other, but even that's too kind." I didn't feel joy hearing it. Not really. What I felt was something quieter, vindication mixed with fatigue. Like watching the last domino fall after a year of pretending everything was stable. By the end of that week, the refunds from every vendor were finalized. I stared at the balance on my screen one last time, $42,000 exactly. The number I once spent to build her dream now sat neatly under my name. I transferred it into a new account, labeled Harper Developments. That night, Mark came over with a bottle of whiskey. We didn't talk much about Lydia. We just sat on the balcony, the city lights flickering below. He finally said, "You know, most people would have burned her stuff, trashed her online, done something messy. You just erased her." I said, "Messy was her thing. I just built the exit." He nodded and walked right through it. Months passed. Life returned to something resembling normal. Work picked up, and by early spring, I was managing the biggest contract of my career, a new hotel project downtown. Funny thing was, Lydia had once sent me the brochure for that very place, saying it would make a perfect honeymoon spot. Every time I walked through the site, I thought about how poetic that was. She wanted to stay there, and I was the one building it. One afternoon, about 5 months after the non-wedding, I ran into her at a grocery store. The universe has a cruel sense of humor sometimes. She looked smaller. Her hair was darker, cut short. She was wearing plain clothes. No makeup, nothing like the carefully crafted image she used to keep up. She froze when she saw me near the produce section. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she said my name softly. "Ben." I nodded once. "Lydia." She asked how I'd been. Her tone was cautious, as if approaching an animal that might bite. I said I'd been working. She gave a little half-smile, maybe out of habit, and said she was trying to start over. There was a pause that felt longer than it should have been. She finally said, "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. Canceling everything. You didn't think I'd walk away?" She hesitated. "No. I thought you'd forgive me eventually." That hit me harder than I expected. Not because of the arrogance, but because she meant it. In her mind, forgiveness was inevitable, like a maintenance task that would eventually get done once tempers cooled. I didn't respond. I just looked at her, then at the groceries in my cart, bread, coffee, oranges, and said, "Take care of yourself." When I turned to leave, she called after me. "Ben, I'm sorry." I stopped for a moment, then said, without turning around, "I know." And I walked out. The sound of the automatic doors closing behind me felt final. By the time summer rolled around, my company had grown. I'd used the wedding funds as seed money to start my own small contracting business. It wasn't glamorous, mostly remodeling jobs and small builds, but it was mine. Every invoice that cleared, every signed contract, felt cleaner than anything I'd experienced in years. Occasionally, people who knew both of us would bring her up. They'd say she'd moved out of the city, that she was staying with relatives, working part-time, trying to rebuild her reputation. I never asked for details. I didn't hate her, I just didn't care anymore. What stuck with me wasn't her betrayal. It was how easily she expected to be rescued after it. How she weaponized her own regret into leverage. That lesson changed how I viewed everything. Work, people, promises. I became sharper about who I trusted. Not bitter, just careful. 6 months after the canceled wedding, I got an email from the last vendor, the florist. They'd found an overpayment in their books and were sending me a small refund check, about $300. It wasn't much, but the note attached said, "We hope your next celebration brings you peace." I smiled at that. Not happiness, peace. That word finally fit. That weekend, I drove out to the lake. The lodge was quiet, off-season, the water still. The same dock where Lydia once said she wanted to walk down the aisle was empty now, weathered from winter. I sat there for a while, watching the ripples, the sunlight catching on the water. No anger, no nostalgia, just the strange realization that closure isn't dramatic, it's quiet. Before leaving, I took a photo again from the same spot as before. Only this time, no empty chairs, no venue lights, no traces of her anywhere. Just the lake, calm and indifferent. When I got home, I printed that photo and pinned it above my desk. Beneath it, I wrote one line on a sticky note. The work paid for everything. Because it did. It paid for her lessons, my freedom, and the foundation of a life I built from the wreckage. Lydia once said I was too busy working to notice her slipping away. The truth is, work was never what pushed her away. It was the only thing that saved me from staying. And in the end, when she showed up hungry to a canceled reception, surrounded by guests in silence, I didn't need to say a word. The receipts had already spoken.